Hi, this video is about the cell cycle. First, let's look at why cells reproduce in the first place. There are a couple reasons why. In order to create offspring, to repair damaged cells, and to grow. Let's start off with reproduction, or the creation of offspring. Every human started off as one single cell through the process of fertilization, where a sperm fertilizes an egg. This one cell then went through cellular differentiation to become all of the different cells in your body. All of the cells in your body have the same DNA, so how do they look different? Well, certain genes are turned on in those cells, which then help them to develop into that specific cell. Let's recap. Cellular differentiation is the process of creating specialized or different cells from a stem cell. Now let's talk about cell repair or replacement. Throughout the lifespan of an organism, cells die or become damaged and must be replaced. This is the process that helps that to happen. Think back to a time when you scratched your elbow or your knee. Do you still have that same scratch? Hopefully not. And this is because of cell repair and replacement. Now, let's talk about growth. Throughout the lifespan of a person, you create more and more cells. You do not have the same amount of cells that you did when you were born. You have way more. Because in order to grow, your cells don't just get bigger and bigger, you get more cells. There are two major types of cells in plants and animals. They're called somatic and gametes. Somatic cells are body cells, and gametes are sex cells. Let's look at them more closely. Somatic cells are body cells. Soma means body. Somatic cells are made through the process of mitosis. And here's a little dorky thing that you can use to help you to remember that. Mitosis happens in mitoses. Cells made through the process of mitosis are identical. And the reason for this is because you don't want one of your cells to have different DNA than the one right next to it in your skin. This would create abnormalities. Mitosis creates two identical diploid cells that have the same full set of identical DNA. The way that you can remember this is think about the T in mitosis. Mitosis has a T in it. The word two starts with T, and double also means two. So double diploid. Mitosis makes two diploid cells with a full double set of DNA. The word diploid is represented by 2N, which means that it has an identical pair of matching chromosomes. Every human has 23 pairs of chromosomes, so N equals 23. When we multiply that times 2, we get 46, which then is the total amount of chromosomes in a human somatic cell. Remember, somatic means body. The other type of cells are gametes, and remember, they are sex cells. In a male, that's called a sperm, and in a female, it is an egg. Or when you're looking at plants, that would be pollen is the male part, female part is still the egg. Gametes are made through the process called meiosis. Meiosis creates different cells due to a process called crossing over, which then creates completely different gametes. These cells are different, which increases genetic variation or genetic diversity. Remember, whenever you hear the word meiosis, I want you to think about the fact that it increases genetic variation, which is also called genetic diversity. This is why daughters and sons of the same set of parents are not identical, because all of the gametes in the father are different. All of the gametes in the mother are different. This is why we have so much genetic variation within the human species. Meiosis creates 4 haploid cells, which are all genetically different from the parent and contain half of the DNA of that parent cell. Keep in mind that haploid means half, diploid means double. Half haploid, double diploid. Human gametes have half the amount of chromosomes necessary to make a human, which is why you need one from each parent with sexual reproduction. Half comes from your mother, half comes from your father. This combination then creates one whole diploid cell. A human creates gametes which have half the number of chromosomes as their somatic cells. If the 2n or diploid number is 46, the haploid number, or half, 1n, is 23. To find the haploid number, divide the diploid number by 2. All right, now let's look at the 3 major phases of the cell cycle. The first is interphase, followed by mitosis, which is then followed by cytokinesis. Interphase is the longest phase of the cell cycle and is comprised of 3 parts. These parts are easy to remember because they make a little sandwich: G1, S, and G2. Let's look at each of those more closely now. G1 stands for gap 1. The way you can remember what happens during gap 1 is it starts with a G, and so does the word grow. This is when the cell is growing. After the cell grows, the S phase happens. S stands for DNA synthesis, and the word synthesis means to make. So you're making a copy of DNA. This is where DNA replication occurs. The last step of interphase goes right back to G again, and we're at G2. G2 stands for gap 2, and the cell grows and copies its organelles. All right, let's talk about mitosis in more depth. Mitosis is the process of creating cells that results in 2 identical diploid cells. Mitosis is broken down into 4 stages: PMAT, prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. Prophase is when the cell is preparing for division. Chromatin, which is little strands of DNA, start to form into chromosomes, which make them more compact and easy to divide. Think about if you wanted to give someone some string. You wouldn't give them jumbled up string. You would give it to them in a spool so that it's easier to transport. So, DNA chromatin forms chromosomes. The nuclear membrane starts to dissolve, and centrioles move to opposite ends of the cell as spindle fibers start to form. This then gets the cell ready for the next phase, which is metaphase. Metaphase is when the chromosomes line up in the middle of the cell. The way that you can remember this is metaphase starts with an M, so does middle. Metaphase, the chromosomes meet in the middle of the cell. It looks like little X's lined up in the middle. So, since those centrioles moved to the opposite poles of the cell during prophase, they then use the spindle fibers. The way you can remember this is, think of the centrioles as little cowboys. They actually kind of look like little tiny cowboy hats, and you can think about them as being cowboys that use the spindle fibers to lasso those little chromosomes and pull them into the middle of the cell. This then prepares the cell for the next phase, where the chromosomes split. Anaphase is that next step. Anaphase is when the chromosomes are pulled apart. The way you can remember this is anaphase starts with an A, so does the word apart. And when you think about chromosomes, which are in the shape of an X, when they're pulled apart, they kind of look like A's. The last phase of mitosis is called telophase. During telophase, 2 nuclear membranes form around the DNA of the cells to form 2 nuclei. This is how you can remember it. Telophase starts with a T, so does the word 2 nuclei. Also think about if you and your friend are in different houses. How are you going to communicate? Well, you'll use a telephone. So telephone kind of sounds like telophase. Telophase, telephone, 2 nuclei. The last stage of the cell cycle is cytokinesis. The cytoplasm moves apart, creating 2 identical cells. The cell membranes also form around them to separate them. You can remember what cytokinesis is by thinking about the word. Cytokinesis has a K smack dab in the middle. That K you can think of as a big karate chop that chops them in half, creating two identical cells and completing the cell cycle. Those two cells then each go through their own cell cycle, resulting in two more identical cells. This is then going to be used to help the cell to replace dead cells and help the organism to grow. When creating new cells, things can go wrong. Either a mutation can occur during DNA replication, or a carcinogen can cause a mutation, which then results in cancer. Cancer is uncontrolled division of the cell. It's often called uncontrolled mitosis. This creation of cells happens faster than normal because the cell never rests during interphase. It just keeps dividing, dividing, and dividing. And if you keep dividing cells faster than the normal rate, they'll make a lump, which then results in a tumor. All right, to further help you to remember these steps, I have a little dance. This dance I've watched all of my students do while they're taking exams, and I see that little light in their eye, which lets me know that this helps. So don't fight it, it's gonna help. The first step of the cell cycle is interphase. The cell is growing and copying the DNA. So you can go ahead and get really raver with this if you want to. This is interphase. Then we move into the first step of mitosis, which is prophase, where the DNA is jumbled up in the middle of the cell. We already have two sets, like I have two hands, prophase. The next step is metaphase, where the chromosomes line up in the middle of the cell. After metaphase, they're pulled apart during anaphase, and this is where you can let those jazz hands just go. Anaphase then is followed by telophase, where we have two nuclei. They have to talk to each other on telephones. And then the final step of the cell cycle is cytokinesis. All right, let's go ahead and do the dance now. It's your turn. Starting out, we have interphase, prophase. You can do the Cabbage Patch. Metaphase, anaphase, telophase, cytokinesis. Now, I also created a little poster that will help you to remember this. In the poster, I've arranged it so that you can remember these steps of the cell cycle as I, PMAT, C. In the middle, we have mitosis, PMAT. Interphase and cytokinesis are not part of mitosis. They come before and after. So, how many steps are there in mitosis? 4. All right, let's look at some of the similarities and differences between mitosis and meiosis. Please reference the chart that is inside of your folder. It's labeled mitosis versus meiosis. Mitosis creates somatic cells, which are body cells. Meiosis creates gametes, which are sex cells. In mitosis, the cell divides once. In meiosis, the cell divides twice. In mitosis, 2 daughter cells are created. Meiosis creates 4 daughter cells. Mitosis creates cells that are identical to each other and also the parent cell. Meiosis does not create identical cells. They create genetic diversity and variation. The cells created in mitosis maintain the chromosome number, which makes them the same as the parent cell. Meiosis halves the chromosome number, which creates half the amount of chromosomes as the parent. Mitosis creates diploid cells, which is 2N. Meiosis creates haploid cells, which are 1N. Mitosis is associated with asexual reproduction. Meiosis is associated with sexual reproduction to make new organisms. Now you're ready to take the Quizlet to test what you've learned. Do the mitosis dance to help you to remember the phases, And also make sure to look at the resources in the folder if you need extra support. Thank you again.